Hey, what's up and welcome to the Game Positive Podcast. E3 is fast approaching, and today I'm going to give you all my predictions for what I expect to see and what I hope to see during the show. How it's going to work is I'm going to give my honest expectations of what I think will happen, followed by what I think is in the realm of possibility, something that I hope to see, but not necessarily a guarantee. And then finally, for each topic or each point, I will give one kind of hopes and dreams, pie in the sky, wild guess. E3 is like legit a holiday for me. It's something I look forward to every single year, and oftentimes I even like take work off just to soak it all in. I clean my room, I get a bunch of snacks and everything like it's the Super Bowl or something like that. Last year, even though everyone gave a valiant effort during some really trying times in the industry, it just wasn't the same. It still pains me that Sony gave up on E3, at least like in recent years. But I am looking forward to a big showcase from everyone else. E3 really feels like it's back, and I can't wait to get into these predictions, so let's get started. First up on the calendar is going to be the Summer Games Fest. I'm not entirely sure what to expect from Summer's Game Fest, other than it's being hosted by one of Canada's greatest heroes, the one and only Geoff Keighley. So I'm going to kind of use this as more of like a placeholder for games that I expect to be shown at the show, but not exactly sure where they'll show up in terms of the other conferences. So this will be a little bit like a rapid fire string of predictions here. So first up, GTA 5, I think we'll see a trailer for the next-gen improvements. It is confirmed to be coming this year. Even though it's a game from Xbox 360 era, it will still be one of the year's biggest sellers, and GTA and Geoff Keighley kind of have a bit of a connection historically, so I expect to see that. There's definitely going to be a new Call of Duty this year, like every other year, and with Sony skipping E3, but likely maintaining that marketing agreement with Activision, it has to be revealed somewhere, and I think this is a great place for it. I haven't actually looked into too many of the rumors, so I'm not 100% sure what it's going to be. My guess is something similar to Modern Warfare. A Dead Space remaster. Now, I know that EA Play is doing its own sort of E3 thing that's happening in July, a little ways away. I expect to see some Dragon Age stuff there, some new Mass Effect stuff there, but I think that with the success of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, that the Dead Space remaster kind of announcement, just like a stinger trailer, I think this is a good place for that. And then perhaps maybe a gameplay reveal at EA Play in July or something along those lines. CD Projekt Red, I think they're going to make their presence known this year. Even though Cyberpunk has kind of left a lot of people's minds, it's still a really massive IP, and it still had one of the biggest launches ever. And there is planned DLC for that, so I'm hoping and kind of expecting to see a trailer that will kind of give us a little bit of insight as to what to expect from those DLCs. Also, it'd be nice to see kind of a next-gen trailer for the Witcher 3 enhancements that are supposed to be coming this year. They have been active in releasing kind of timelines and like roadmaps for what's coming, so I think that culminates with some sort of trailer at the Summer Games Fest. I think this is also a great place to reveal a release time or window or trailer for The Wolf Among Us 2. That's a game that was announced 2 years ago at the Game Awards, so again, it has that kind of Keighley connection, and yeah, it's one of the most successful, most beloved IPs from that era where it seems like everything was getting a Telltale style game. So yeah, I hope to see that game be trailered and a release date confirmed, hopefully in 2021. Now, what is a hope? Something I hope to see. I hope to see the reveal of Kojima Productions' next game. Death Stranding was revealed 3 years before it actually came out, and it launched in fall 2019. The next game from Kojima would have, at the very least, been in pre-production for a year and full development for another year, according to that timeline. And along with Kojima's great relationship with Geoff Keighley, I just think that it's a real possibility that we will see that here, although there is one other timeline that could happen, which will be significantly more of a bombshell, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Pie in the sky, hope and dream prediction. which is almost guaranteed to not happen. I want to see a revival of Guitar Hero and or Rock Band. I know the last attempt was kind of a failure, but that, in my opinion, was because of some really greedy and ridiculous monetization attempts, especially on Guitar Hero's side. The fact that I own a guitar set for Guitar Hero Live right now that's essentially unusable because of how insane the monetization was with the music pass for that game. I think we're due for a new one, and I definitely want to start playing tiny plastic musical instruments again. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure what to expect from the Summer Game Fest, so that's kind of all I have for that one. I'll probably be wrong on a lot of these, but I hope to be a lot more accurate as we go forward with the next showcase, which will be Ubisoft. Ubisoft being a very, very international studio that has a very collaborative culture with all of its studios working together on various games. It was hit pretty hard by the pandemic in 2020 and still likely feeling the effects of that to this day. So last year, they couldn't really go for a traditional show and split things up into smaller announcement shows. Like, for example, if you have a team in Canada working on a game that's depending on developers that are working in Shanghai and the US and France and India, and COVID's affecting all those places in different ways with different things, I think Ubisoft might have gotten hit a lot harder than a lot of other people. The fact that they were able to successfully launch Valhalla and Immortals Fenyx Rising, I think, is a pretty huge accomplishment, but I think they're going to be back in full swing with this E3 showcase. What I expect to see from Ubisoft. First up, I expect to see a proper reveal of the Division Heartlands. I think there is kind of a little bit of confusion around this one. A lot of people, like myself included, at least originally, I thought the Division Heartlands was a new expansion for the Division 2, similar to how like Warlords of New York, but it's actually a spin-off game made by Red Storm, the developer of the original Tom Clancy games from way, way back, that is set within the Division universe, which is basically all we officially know right now. Unofficially, however, we know from a pretty unfortunate leak that they're making some large-scale changes to the formula. First of all, it's not set in a big city like Washington or New York. It's instead set in a small town in the heartland of America. I think they said it was in Virginia or something like that. You will get to. They said you will get to know the town and its quote mysterious story through co-op PvE mode called Expeditions. But the real meat and potatoes will come from a mode called the Storm, which is a 45-player PvEVP mode. They say both modes were described as the most unpredictable virus contamination the Division has ever seen. I'm personally guessing for a 2022 release date there. When they say the most unpredictable virus contamination the Division has ever seen, that immediately triggers my brain to think of zombies. I had this kind of discussion a long time ago with the original Division in the forums and the subreddits for the Division, where I was talking about how I think that one of the drawbacks to the Division, or at least like if you're comparing it to something like Diablo or something like Destiny, is that yes, it's cool that it has a Tom Clancy name attached to it, but grounding it so heavily in reality really limits what you can do from a gameplay perspective, but also from a loot perspective. Like in Destiny, you can get like the Helm of Inmost Light, that is a helm that has like light shooting out of it or whatever, right? But in the Division, when you get a legendary backpack, it still looks like a backpack, right? So there's kind of a little bit of a disconnect there from what players' expectations are in a loot game versus what is capable or what's possible when you are grounded in reality. One thing that I had suggested, and this, like maybe they're doing this here, but probably not, was not necessarily zombies, but what if the virus kind of forced people to live underground, and because they were living underground with no access to sunlight, they kind of were going crazy, and maybe their skin turned pale, so they look a little bit deformed, and they were a little bit more like primal and savage in nature, and maybe you fought something like that, which would be pretty cool. But anyway, that's pure speculation. I'm pretty excited to see this, especially knowing now that it's kind of a standalone experience, which will make it a lot easier for people to jump into. The survival mode was criminally underappreciated in the original Division because it was locked behind a DLC paywall, and the Storm being a 45-player PvE/VP mode really makes me think that it's going to be similar to the Storm or to Survival, or kind of like a expanding of that mode. So really hope to see that. Next up, I expect to see Rainbow Six Quarantine, an actual gameplay reveal, something that we haven't really gotten yet. This has been delayed so many times, but I do think that we finally get to see it in action at this E3. Rainbow Six Siege actually launched with a bit of a whimper, but it has grown to become one of the most successful products that Ubisoft has ever released, and to this day is one of the most popular multiplayer games in existence. The support for that game from Ubisoft has been phenomenal, and I think this could bring a new level of popularity to it if they can capture some of the PvE shooter crowd, because everyone's expecting Quarantine to be a PvE mode, potentially with zombies or something like that. And although they could face some competition with Back 4 Blood, which I also expect to see somewhere at E3 here, I'm just not sure. Maybe perhaps Summer Games Fest. But both of those things I believe are going to come in fall 2021. Launching so close together may cause issues for one of them, but I do expect to finally see gameplay from Rainbow Six Siege Quarantine. Next up is the Prince of Persia remaster launch date. This game was supposed to actually have come out in January, and it had been delayed to spring and then delayed inevitably since then. This game is being developed by Ubisoft India, a country which has been hit very hard by COVID-19, perhaps one of the most hardest hit countries. So the delays are definitely understandable, but I do think that this is still coming at some point in 2021. My guess is a December release date. I think December was a really great place for Immortals Fenyx Rising. Last year, it was able to kind of dodge some of the heavy hitters and settle in nicely in that December window. And I expect that similar success for Prince of Persia if it were to follow suit with that release window. I'm really pulling for this remake as or I'm really pulling for it to be a hit, because I really want to see this series come back. I do absolutely adore Assassin's Creed, but the growth of Assassin's Creed and the success of Assassin's Creed really came at the cost of Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia was one of the best trilogy of games that you could play on the original Xbox and PS2, and it was kind of the Assassin's Creed before Assassin's Creed. And I would like to see that come back. But I do think there is space for that as well, because Assassin's Creed is definitely trending more to an open world style game, where I think that Prince of Persia could fit nicely into more of a linear action adventure title. So hopefully we get a release date for that. Also, speaking of Assassin's Creed, I do not really expect to see a new one revealed this year, as I think Ubisoft kind of understands the importance of putting that year buffer in between releases. Like they had a lot of success with Valhalla, separating it by a year from Odyssey, but I do expect to see the reveal of like the next kind of large scale DLC pack for Valhalla, similar like in size and scope to what Fate of Atlantis was for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So that would be really cool to see. Those are all things that I expect to see. What I hope to see is the same thing that I hope to see at every single E3, and that is a new Splinter Cell game. Every single year I predict that this is going to happen. So the more times I predict it, the more likely I am to be right. Right? That's how that works, right? That logically that tracks, I think. Anyways, I do think that it makes sense to have some sort of end of conference teaser, and then perhaps maybe have a gameplay reveal on the Xbox stage the next day, similar to how Anthem did it, with it being teased at the end of EA Play and then revealed fully at the Xbox show. I think that Splinter Cell would be a very, very huge exclusive for Xbox in terms of like the marketing arrangements. It was a massive exclusive, like full stop exclusive for the original Xbox back in the day. And the way that they're positioning the Xbox and trying to recapture the market with like Halo Infinite, drawing inspiration from Combat Evolved and stuff like that, I think that that connection of a Splinter Cell and Xbox is just too good to not pull off. I would also like to get an update from the 2 games that kind of have been in development in development hell at Ubisoft, that being Beyond Good and Evil 2 and Skull and Bones. Both of those games have a very unique premise, and they've been shown off a lot, but they've seemingly been like rebooted several times between the 2 of them. So hopefully those teams are doing okay, and hopefully they're on track to show us something. But my hopes and dreams for the Ubisoft conference is a little bit of a weird one, I think. I really should be putting Splinter Cell here as well, but I won't. So instead, I'm going to say I would love to see the return of the UbiArt engine and the UbiArt games outside of just Dance Central, which I'm sure will also be at this conference in some way, shape, or form. I think that Rayman Legends is actually one of the best platformers like of all time if you really put some time into playing it. And I think games like Child of Light and Valiant Hearts are just absolute gems. And there really hasn't been anything else coming from that UbiArt engine or that the teams that made those games, at least for like the last 7 years. I think it's been 7 years since Valiant Hearts. So I would love to see an original kind of adventure game or original game within that beautiful engine make a comeback. I think Game Pass is also a perfect place for something like that to really shine. I'm going to go over these next few a little quicker before we get into Xbox, because they're going to be, I think, a little bit smaller in scope, just because there's a lot of kind of delays happening and stuff that isn't really relevant to Xbox, which is my specialty. So anyways, next up would be Square Enix Presents. I think this is going to act like a pseudo PlayStation conference in absence of Sony actually being there, just because they seem to have locked up a lot of exclusives with Square Enix. I expect to see more information on Final Fantasy 16 and Project Athia, which is, I believe, now known as Forspoken, all of which is exclusive to PlayStation. I do, however, expect to see some gameplay, or at least a more in-depth trailer of the Wakandan expansion for Marvel's Avengers, a game in which I'm really, really interested to get back into, especially since it's been enhanced for next gen. I wouldn't be surprised to see that coming to Game Pass being announced at E3 as well. There was a Tomb Raider anime that was announced, but nothing was really shown of it, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a trailer here. Life is Strange Colors had a pretty inclusive reveal. I'm not sure what else there would be to show for that game, because the release date's actually coming up, I think, in September. So I don't actually expect to see much for that, but they could show a trailer of some of the upgrades coming to the remaster that's also launching of the original Life is Strange, which I don't think they've shown yet. What I hope to see is some information on the rumored Final Fantasy Origins game, a game that is set in the Final Fantasy universe but is being developed as an action RPG by Team Ninja. Those are the people that brought us Ninja Gaiden and Neo. Pie in the sky hopes and dreams prediction would be to actually reveal that Final Fantasy VII Remake is actually coming to Xbox and PC and give us a date. They have never, ever, ever said that it's not coming, but they have also never, ever said that it is coming, which is really frustrating because the game is actually incredible and deserves to be played by as many people as possible. Next up would be the WB Games Showcase. Warner Brothers was honestly like the highlight, I think, for me of summer last year in terms of conferences that were kind of thrown together throughout the pandemic. Although that was obviously helped a lot by the absolutely incredible trailer for Robert Pattinson's movie, The Batman. Well, they don't have anything coming this year, as far as I know, as almost everything that the game studios have been working on has been delayed until 2022. That doesn't mean that they won't have anything to show. I don't expect to see any more information on Batman Gotham Knights, as that game was actually supposed to release this year, and games that are delayed are often like put into like a all hands on deck mode. And the budget that they allocate throughout the beginning, like project management section of any game, the budget they allocate for like showcases and gameplay demos and reveals and stuff like that, those typically don't get like refilled once they're spent. And they did spend that last summer with the gameplay reveal of Gotham Knights. So I'm not really expecting to see that at the show. I do expect, though, to see more from the team at Monolith that is working, I believe, on Lord of the Rings Gollum. That was a COVID casualty as well and was delayed, but has only had a cinematic reveal so far. So the budget that they would associate to creating a gameplay demo or some kind of like gameplay trailer hasn't actually been spent yet, as far as we know. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that we will see that at the show. What I hope to see more of Rocksteady's Suicide Squad, although I'm very, very skeptical that that will be there. Also, Mortal Kombat 11 is coming up on being 2 years old. I don't expect to see a new Mortal Kombat, but I do hope to see whatever's coming next from NetherRealm. Logic would point to it being Injustice 3, but Ed Boon has actually been teasing a Marvel crossover on Twitter, which would be kind of mind-blowing. If there were any legs to that at all, seeing Marvel versus Mortal Kombat or DC versus Marvel in a NetherRealms fighting game would be day one. Like, sign me up for that. Please, please, please. Pie in the Sky Hopes and Dreams prediction is a big one that will likely never ever happen, but maybe it will. With the Matrix movie being slotted for a late 2021 release, I would absolutely love to see a Matrix video game for next generation consoles. Enter the Matrix and the Matrix Path of Neo were so amazing on the original Xbox. It's one of my all-time favorite film series. My dream, I've always said, you know, when they ask those questions like, what's your dream game and developer combination? My dream game and developer combination, the answer I answer to that question every single time for the last however long, has been a Matrix game made by Rocksteady, which obviously is probably not happening as they got their hands full with Suicide Squad. But at this point, I'll take a Matrix game made by literally anybody. Please, please give us a Matrix game. All right, now we are at the main event. Xbox Game Studios and Bethesda all in one big happy family. Now, I want to say a quick disclaimer before I start. I am obviously a very, very massive Xbox fan. I am going to overhype this, but I'm not trying to be disingenuous. This is literally just how excited I am for the show. I'm going to try and stay rational and lay off the hyperbole and keep my predictions realistic, but I just want to warn you that it probably won't happen. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Xbox has, over the last few years, been building up to this moment. They have been stocking up on ammunition in the form of studio acquisitions, and during that time, they have taken a few shots, but I feel like this E3 is where they literally just full send. They have spent billions of dollars, literally $7.5 billion, building the biggest cannon in the world, and it's pointed right at everyone's face. Minds will be blown, minds will be changed. This has the potential to be the biggest E3 in the entire history of Xbox. So I'm going to go through some of the third parties I think could show up and some of the potential Game Pass announcements, and then I'll go through every single studio in Xbox Game Studio and tell you what I think they may or may not be bringing to the table. Before I jump into that, though, one quick big prediction. I think this is likely to be close to being true no matter what, but I think that the stage would be set super well if Phil Spencer comes out after what I expect to be a Halo Infinite cold open and says everything that you see today in this entire showcase will be available day one on Game Pass. They have enough studios, enough third-party relationships, and enough money, frankly, to pull this off. And I really think it just comes down to whether or not there's going to be that one or two like giant third-party game that they'll announce or show that very clearly doesn't make sense to show up on Game Pass. Like, for example, if Splinter Cell gameplay is going to be revealed at the Xbox show, I don't expect that game to be on Game Pass. So there could be one or two, which prevents them from making that statement that everything you see will be on Game Pass. But I think that is likely or could actually happen. But anyways, third parties. So I already had mentioned Splinter Cell. I do think that if Splinter Cell is here, or if Splinter Cell is announced, it will be shown in some way, shape, or form at the Xbox show. There is a rumored game being developed by a third party as an Xbox exclusive, codenamed Project Typhoon. My best guess is that this is it's being rumored to be kind of like an open world co-op adventure action game. And I think that it's going to be made by Avalanche, the team that made Rage 2 and Just Cause, just because they have worked with Bethesda very closely in the past. They are very well versed in doing open world action games. And as of right now, there's not a whole lot that's been announced that they're working on since Rage 2, which I believe came out in 2017, 2018. It's fairly old. They are working on the dinosaur game, is it called Age of Extinction, or maybe just called Extinction? I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they have said repeatedly that is being developed as a kind of a side project by a smaller team, similar to how Grounded is being made at Obsidian. And that game is heavily supporting Game Pass and been shown on Microsoft stage many times. So there's obviously a connection there with Avalanche and Microsoft, and Avalanche and Bethesda. So I think this Project Typhoon game is going to be made by Avalanche, and the rumors are saying that's far along in development. So I can see that being revealed at E3. Next up is Disco Elysium. That game is confirmed to be coming to Xbox. It was nominated for, it seemed like 1 billion awards at the Game Awards last year. I think it's already out on PlayStation. It was just coming there first. I think it makes 100% sense for, along with its release on Xbox, for it to also come on Game Pass. Persona 5 Royale has been approved for sale in the Brazilian ratings board. So that's kind of writings on the wall. And a lot of the times when these Japanese games finally make their way to Xbox, they end up on Game Pass. Look at Yakuza, for example. And finally, this has to happen, right? Like, it's been so long. Cuphead, The Delicious Last Course. That was announced, I think it was announced literally 3 years ago as a DLC for Cuphead, one of the best games ever. But then it has been silent ever since. And I know it's a small team. I think it's literally 2 brothers and one of the brothers' wives that are make up almost the entire studio. But it's been a long, long time. I totally expect to see this. And before I jump into the studios, I do just want to take a second to talk about acquisitions. This is a category for speculation that is really only reserved for Microsoft, as they have been so aggressive in building the quote biggest cannon in the world. I'm of the mind, though, that they kind of have more than enough in the stable right now, and they should really focus everything on building quality games from the teams that they already have. But there has been a lot of rumors circulating that, well, it's not likely for them to acquire another studio, at least in the short term, that they are heavily looking to acquire some IP. This is a lot less common in the games industry, from my experience anyway. The last time I can remember this happening with Xbox specifically is when they acquired Gears of War from Epic Games. But I mean, that was a pretty straightforward acquisition. It's not something that really came as a surprise to anybody. In terms of what IP they could be buying, however, well, first you have to look at who is looking to sell their IP. The only 2 studios that really come to mind are Konami and WB Games. Konami is looking to move back into like the pachinko business. They haven't really done anything with their major IPs lately, and it's been heavily rumored that they're looking to sell. And same goes with WB Games. WB Games, I think, was closing in on a sale of the whole studio as recently as last year, but that apparently has fallen apart as that company is going through major mergers with other huge media conglomerates. A lot of the IP connected to WB Games are IPs based on properties owned by Warner Brothers, like DC Comics, Lord of the Rings. Those, I think, would be untouchable, but they do have some pretty cool original IPs like that they own that are outside of that, like Mortal Kombat or the long dormant Fear franchise. Konami obviously has some mega IP like Castlevania, Bomberman, Silent Hill, and of course Metal Gear Solid. So there's also the possibility, I guess, that they're aiming to acquire the video game rights to like non-video game IP, like perhaps this whole thing is about Indiana Jones, or maybe there's another comic book IP. It's just really hard to predict this scenario because it's a very uncommon thing for a video game publisher to acquire an IP for use in making video games. However, there is one extremely insane scenario that is there's no way that this can happen, but it I guess technically possible. So I feel like I have to mention it. If you looked at Phil Spencer's, shelf in the last few times he's been on camera, the Ludens statue, like the icon or like the mascot, for lack of a better term, for Kojima Productions, is sitting on his shelf. And Konami is looking to sell IPs, potentially, and they own Metal Gear. If Microsoft is able to convince Kojima to make a game exclusively for Xbox and PC, which, I mean, is not impossible, because when faced with like the massive amounts of money that Microsoft is capable of giving you, it's very hard to say no, especially since you know that the game will be accessible to anybody like in Japan or Asia that has a PC, right? And the amount of money that you get will guarantee you'll have like insane amounts of creative freedom, and you'll be able to work with the IP that you created. Imagine a world in which Microsoft acquires Metal Gear Solid and hires Kojima Productions to make that game. They could sign on the dotted line today and announce it next week at E3, and just have a logo, and that would literally break everything. That would break the entire internet. No other reveal at the entire conference would matter. Nothing could top that, which is why I think it's extremely unlikely to happen. So let's move on to the Xbox Game Studios. First up, we have 343 Industries. I do expect to see Halo literally as soon as the presentation begins. However, I'm not actually expecting it to be some like extremely huge gameplay deep dive like a lot of people are predicting, like a 10-minute, 7-minute like long form demo. Like I said earlier, when games are being developed and the timelines are being planned, there's a budget of time and money that's allocated to things like E3, creating trailers, creating assets and stuff like that. And especially for games as high profile as Halo, if they're delayed, those budgets for those kind of peripheral things, they do not get like replenished most of the time. You may like replenish them a little bit to create a launch trailer that you didn't envision having to do initially, but the time and money that you budget for as big of a reveal as they did last year, that's not going to happen again, because the team literally needs to do everything in their power to hit this next deadline. And they're not going to want to do anything that's going to take time away from that. So what I expect to see is some sort of encompassing trailer that would include probably some stuff from the campaign, but also focus on multiplayer. Perhaps have some more story bits revealed. If we're lucky, maybe they'll reveal that the Flood is in the game. What I hope to see from this announcement is the reveal of an open beta for Halo Infinite multiplayer. When Master Chief Collection launched and had all kinds of issues at launch, 343 claimed that they will be releasing a beta for literally everything they do going forward, as kind of a way to learn from that mistake. And the beta testing period for Halo 5 was really, really good. And they have been extremely diligent with beta testing everything that they've been doing with Master Chief Collection in the form of their flighting program. So I don't question that a beta for Halo Infinite will exist, but I do hope to see it very soon. Like perhaps even like a shadow drop, like play the beta after the conference. Like, you know what I mean? My hopes and dreams, though, are actually, I think, somewhat realistic. My hope is that Halo Infinite puts Halo back on top of the gaming pantheon where it belongs. Since 2001, Halo and Master Chief have deservingly been in the same leagues, the same breadths as the likes of like Mario and Zelda and Kratos and Nathan Drake. And with the length of time that there's been between Halo 5 and Halo MCC's issues and now, Master Chief is kind of losing his place in the hearts and minds of gamers around the world, especially younger gamers. Imagine being born in like, I don't know, 2010, right? And you're like 11 years old right now, which when I was 11, I was playing Halo 1 and loving it. Imagine being 11 now and you'd probably don't even know what Halo is. there has been nothing really shown to you about Halo. You know what Fortnite is, and you know what Call of Duty is, because those things have been very consistent throughout your whole life. But I really hope that the release of Halo Infinite can bring Halo back to where it belongs. Next up is the Coalition. I don't actually expect the Coalition to be at the conference at all. They have announced before the conference that they're going to be kind of going radio silent and working on integrating the newest version of Unreal Engine into their workflow for use in future games. So I don't expect to see anything from them at all, to be honest. I think that the soonest that we'll expect to see something from the Coalition is possibly a Game Awards kind of stinger, similar to how Hellblade was revealed and how Perfect Dark was revealed. But I think the likely scenario would be that similar stinger trailer at the end of next year's E3. What I hope to see, though, is some sort of single-player expansion similar to Hivebusters for Gears Tactics, because that game is amazing and very, very underrated. Although it's probably unlikely because the developers of that game, the core developers, Splash Damage, have actually recently been acquired by Tencent Games, I believe. So they're likely doing something for them right now. Next up, we have Compulsion. I expect Compulsion Games to reveal whatever it is that they have been working on. We Happy Few, a fantastic game, by the way, a game where they clearly were punching above their weight, as the attention to detail and world building in that is absolutely incredible. And it had released as far back as 2018, with the DLC for that game wrapping up in 2019. Now, it's very unlikely that the entire team at Compulsion was working on the DLC. So whatever it is they have been working on likely started pre-production in about 2017 and has been likely in close to full development since 2018, which is approximately like 2 to 3 years from E3, right? Essentially, plenty of time has passed, and it's been in development for, I believe, long enough so that they will have something to show. The community manager at Compulsion Games on the Iron Lords podcast had revealed that the game will be a third-person game, which is literally all we have to go off right now. But a little bit of an aside, I think a lot of people are sleeping on Compulsion Games. I think the thing that people kind of do, which is, in my opinion, slightly annoying, let's say, not just for Compulsion, but for all of the studios Microsoft has acquired, is that they look at what those studios have made. In this case, they'll look at games like Contrast or We Happy Few that Compulsion made, and they think to themselves, okay, Microsoft acquired this studio. The next game, like those games I just mentioned, Contrast, We Happy Few, there'll be a new game similar to those ones, and that game will be exclusive. But that's not the case. The reason Microsoft acquires any studio is because they see a lot of potential in what that studio it had made or is starting to make. And the reason any studio agrees to be acquired in the first place, outside of obviously getting a lot of money, is because they believe that the investment from Microsoft will allow them, aka like support them financially, to achieve that potential. So what you should be thinking is, how much better would We Happy Few have been if the development team was 2 or 3 times bigger and the budget had an extra $100 million attached to it? Because that's what's going to happen with these developers that they've acquired. If you played We Happy Few, then you know the answer to that question of what We Happy Few would be like if it had 100 more developers and $100 million more dollars, is that game would be a Game of the Year contender. I expect to be very happy, pardon the pun, with whatever Compulsion Games shows us at E3. What I hope to see from them is the new game that they're working on is a new original IP or even a reimagining of a dormant one that allows the team at Compulsion Games to showcase that unbelievable creativity that they demonstrated by the world and world building of We Happy Few, and not be assigned to create a sequel to something else, if you know what I mean. My hopes and dreams are that experience will be that in which can finally kind of be comparable to the experience that you will get from those patented Sony first-party third-person action-adventure games. Now, I know it's a huge kind of leap to go from We Happy Few to Uncharted 4, or for a studio like Compulsion to jump into being what Naughty Dog is, but you have to remember, Naughty Dog went from Crash and Jax to Uncharted and Last of Us, right? Those jumps already have been made. Insomniac went from Haze and Sunset Overdrive to Spider-Man. Like, these jumps can happen if the teams are given the opportunity and the backing, the financial backing to make them. And every single studio that Microsoft has acquired has seen exponential growth in terms of their hiring and stuff like that. Next up is Double Fine. I expect Double Fine to reveal the release date for Psychonauts 2, but I don't actually expect them to show what's coming next. I think that will be saved for later in the year, potentially like Xbox Fan Fest or Game Fest or even the Game Awards. Psychonauts 2 has had some development issues and delays, and Double Fine was hit pretty hard by COVID roadblocks. Like, there was a little kind of documentary they made showing how everything was working with everybody working from home, and that kind of impact of COVID hits the hardest to developers that are in the final stretch of development, as that kind of last leg of game development is heavily focused on QA, and QA is probably the most important process of a game's development, to have that collaboration and have someone sitting next to you, seeing you find these bugs and working them out together in real time. So because of that, I don't expect to see what's coming next from Double Fine. I would hope, though, to see their next game be used to kind of revitalize a dormant IP from Xbox. There are tons of games that really fit well into what Double Fine does best, like Blink's Time Sweeper, Voodoo Vince, something like that. It would be cool to see those awesome games make a comeback. My hope and dream is to see a remaster of Brutal Legend. Doesn't necessarily have to be made by Double Fine, and it's likely a tall order due to all the music licensing, but that game is criminally underrated and could very, very much use a performance enhancement, as the 30 FPS and constant frame drops is one of the only blemishes on a great game that is Brutal Legend. I'd even settle for an FPS boost, which is likely more in line with reality, but anyway. Next up is the Initiative. A lot of people don't expect to see anything from the Initiative. A lot of what I hear is that the game is super far away, this game being Perfect Dark, and they expect the Game Awards reveal of Perfect Dark to be similar to the one for Hellblade 2, where they show the game and then go completely silent for a long period of time. But I don't know if I agree with that 100%. The Initiative was announced as a new studio they're forming in E3 2018. But before they announced it and have a name, obviously they did the preliminary things to build it. They hired some staff to kind of shape the team and then be responsible for building the team well before the reveal in E3. It's not going to have the same projected 3 to 4 year build time for Perfect Dark, because a lot of the first year from that 2018 announcement was likely spent hiring developers and conceptualizing the game. But I believe they knew they were going to work on Perfect Dark pretty early, perhaps even before anybody was hired, before the studio was made. It could have been a studio created to do that specifically. I would guess and say the general rough concept of the game, like what it will be, like perspective and maybe tone and stuff like that, which is probably roughly ironed out by the end of 2018, which gives us around 2 years or so of development to work with. It's not the same 2 years that you would get from a fully integrated team, because they have been constantly hiring new people. So it doesn't go as far as 2 years typically go when your team's already in place, but it's 2 years nonetheless. And I think that's plenty of time, considering the budget is likely unlimited and the talent that studio has acquired is some of the best in the industry. I'm going to go on a limb here, but I think we see a gameplay trailer, not a release date. I'm guessing it could be like a 2023 game. It's still probably pretty far off. I will say this is the least certain I am on a prediction, but I don't think the entire conference goes away without something Perfect Dark related. If we do see gameplay, though, I hope to see it as a massive graphical showpiece. Something that has a similar effect on the Series X that Gears of War had on the Xbox 360 as being like a clear and unquestioned leap into the next generation. My hopes and dreams are that Microsoft sees this as the most important game that they have in active development, as this game is going to show the world that they can still give us experience like Halo and Gears, where they build a team from the ground up, they build a game up from the ashes, and they release something that's transformative in the industry. Next up, we have In Exile Entertainment. I don't expect to see a ton from In Exile this year, as Wasteland 3 was just released last August. Brian Fargo, the head of the studio, though, has been active on Twitter, teasing that they are working on a AAA RPG. I just don't think whatever it is they're working on would be nearly far enough along to show anything. I hope that we can at least get a tease into what it is, though, as I think Sony has shown that announcing games super early has its benefits. Like I said, Death Stranding was announced 3 years before it's released. Most games' development cycle entirely is 3 years. My dream, though, is that if they are working on a AAA RPG, that they're working on Fallout 5. Fallout is the last in the list for Bethesda Game Studios. They're working on Starfield right now. After Starfield, it's going to be Elder Scrolls. I don't want Fallout to kind of go off to the wayside. I think In Exile is a perfect team to do that because Wasteland and Fallout have been closely tied together, sharing developers and sharing a lot of history together. And I think that In Exile moving from Wasteland to Fallout is a perfect match for that IP. Next up is Mojang. I'm not convinced they have any presence at the show, although I would not be surprised to see an announcement for new DLC for Minecraft Dungeons. However, I just think that that is something that's likely to be shown on a smaller stage. However, the game itself, I will admit, is more successful than I think anyone predicted. As far as what I hope to see from them, I honestly really don't know. I guess if I could wish for something, though, it would be to see the House of Minecraft be given a full budget to make something new, something bigger than the Scrolls game they made a while ago. Not another Minecraft spinoff, but something like entirely new. The Minecraft team is very big. There's lots of people over there, and they're very talented. I think the sky's the limit for them if they ever decide to build something new. Next up will be Ninja Theory. I fully expect to actually see a gameplay reveal for Hellblade. The game was announced at the end of 2019 at the Game Awards, and they have been radio silent ever since. Microsoft has typically not announced games in the very early stages of development, so I think that they wouldn't have announced Hellblade 2 unless it was far enough along where like the setting, the scope, the character, like the tone of that trailer, like the game that we're expecting to get from that trailer isn't going to have any drastic changes. So my guess is we see gameplay here today. I hope that if we see something, that it's a clear example of how joining Team Xbox, like coming from being independent to joining Team Xbox, allows your games to grow in terms of its scope and scale. Hellblade 1 was a fantastic game, but it clearly was an indie game. You can tell that right away by the length of it, by how linear it was. But with what the tools and the money that Ninja Theory had, they clearly made a masterwork of a game. My hope and dreams, though, are that Hellblade 2 is able to match the scope, I'll say, of God of War, like that wide linear 30-hour experience that God of War has. I don't think that's going to be exactly possible, but this is the section where I talk about hopes and dreams, so anything is possible here. Next up is Obsidian. Obsidian is one of the crown jewels of all the studios that Microsoft have acquired. I do expect them to have a presence at E3, but I expect the extent of that to be kind of an official release date or release trailer for Grounded 1.0. They are currently working on an Elder Scrolls-esque experience in Avowed and rumored to also be working on the Outer Worlds 2, but I just don't feel like those would be far enough along to show anything with substance. I could be wrong, though, as I just have a hard time grasping how big Obsidian is and how those teams are split up. Like, it's very hard to make a AAA game. It's extremely hard to make two, but to make two and Grounded and like have been only like a major development team under the umbrella of a major publisher for like a couple of years. Like, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I have a feeling that if Outer Worlds 2 is greenlit, it's far down the road and just in early pre-production. But we'll see how that plays out. What I would hope to see, though, if we do see something, is some gameplay that provides more context to the world and story of Avowed. I know it's tied into the Pillars of Eternity universe, and it's been a long time since we've seen a new single-player fantasy IP from Microsoft. My dream, though, is that Obsidian is somehow big enough to develop 2 AAA games and Grounded, and we just see it all at E3. Next up is Playground Games. I fully expect to see some Fable gameplay. A lot of people are saying that this game is extremely far away, but I just don't know if I fully buy into that. In early 2018, there was a rumor that due to the critical and commercial success of Horizon Zero Dawn, an open-world game set in a fantasy universe from Sony in 2017, that Microsoft was really eager to get the ball rolling on something similar, and that Playground was going to be working on a Fable game that would try to compete with the with Horizon Zero Dawn in terms of its like scale and scope and stuff like that. I believe part of the reason why Playground chose Fable to compete with Horizon Zero Dawn, or maybe Microsoft chose Fable, was because that would get the ball rolling even faster, as the world and the aesthetic and the lore and all that stuff, maybe even some assets from Fable Legends, were already pre-made. So it's my belief that this game has likely been in close to full development since sometime in 2018, which lines up nicely, in my opinion, with the 2022 release date. This could have been impacted by COVID, but nonetheless, I think that there's plenty of time to have something to show. It's also rumored that the second team at Playground is going to reveal Forza Horizon 5, a game set in Mexico. I think that has way too much smoke for there to be no fire, so I expect to get a trailer for that as well, with probably a 2022 release date. I think there are a lot of asset carryover from the different Forza games, such as like physics, car assets, AI, etc. So I think a follow-up title to a Forza game can actually be done with a smaller team and shorter timeline, which is why I think that it's possible for Forza Horizon 5 to be incoming, but also for Fable to be far along. I don't think like one game has to come before the other in terms of what they're working on. What I hope to see is that Fable has more than just a gameplay trailer. I think that I hope to see them have like a live like kind of gameplay session similar to what they did with Halo Infinite last year. What I hesitantly would dream to see, though, is Fable being a shared world game similar to Destiny, where the single player portion lives up to players' expectations, but that it has a multiplayer component that kind of fills the void of an action looter game that is set in a fantasy setting. Because right now all the looter games are like sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, etc. I say that hesitantly, though, because I know a lot of people would be very concerned to see that, as there has not really been any looter games with a great single-player option, a great storyline, and that's something that Fable fans would really, really want. Next up is Rare. I expect Rare to finally give us some insight on what Everwild actually is with a gameplay trailer. It's been shown off way too many times to both A, not show up at all this E3, or B, show us another ominous trailer that doesn't really answer a lot of the questions people have about this game. I hope to see a big update coming to Sea of Thieves, one that is more of an expansion than your typical new season or new DLC. I want to see the sea expanded with a new region or something bigger, something like that. My dream, though, for Sea of Thieves is to upgrade its capacity for storytelling a little bit, to tell kind of a longer form story over a co-op campaign with like character arcs and cutscenes, and then of course that trademark escape room-esque gameplay. I really want to essentially have what the Taken King was to Destiny 1. I want to have something of that scale happen within Sea of Thieves. Next up is Turn 10. Turn 10 has been very quiet, but if I'm honest, they really never have been known to have a lot of leaks with what they're working on. I think Forza 8, or simply like Forza Motorsport, which I think is what they're calling it now, the new one for Series X, I think that's actually a lock for a 2021 release. Turn 10 Studios has been pumping out Forza games like clockwork since 2005, and it's been nearly 4 years since we've seen a new one. I hope that the gameplay has evolved a little bit beyond the basic sim racing tournaments and car customization loop that we've come to expect from the Forza proper games. I think an interesting direction for Forza to go in that will still separate it from Forza Horizon would be to go into a more narrative focused direction, telling like the story of an up and coming racer as he struggles to make his way through the profession, maybe have some outside influences impacting him and his character, something similar to how Madden and Dirt handle their story modes. I think that is a good way to elevate Forza to a wider audience. Like that would really appeal to me, for example, someone who doesn't play a lot of racing games anymore. My dream, though, is for Microsoft to unleash Turn 10 to tackle another IP in another genre. Turn 10 is one of the most technically gifted teams in all of gaming. They have been releasing racing game masterpieces one after another with literally no competition since 2005. Like nothing has ever come close to matching Forza on the racing platform. Imagine what they could do with the creative freedom to do something entirely new. Next up, Undead Labs. I honestly don't expect anything from them at this year's E3. I think the State of Decay 3 trailer from last year was an early kind of proof of concept, and the team will be hard at work to bring that proof of concept to life. I don't expect to see anything from them in 2021. Next up would be World's Edge. With World's Edge, I also don't imagine them having any presence at E3. I think Age of Empires 4 is an important release that will have a lot of fanfare, but I don't think that E3 is necessarily the right place for them to have the biggest impact. I also think it's kind of telling that they had kind of that big community event a month or so ago that really revealed a lot for the game. Next up will be Alpha Dog. Alpha Dog was, anyway, a mobile-first developer under Bethesda that was obviously acquired as part of the Zenimax acquisition, but nothing is currently known in terms of what they are working on. They are from my hometown, though, so you think they would share all their secrets with me, but they are not for some reason. I'm not sure if they're going to transition from that mobile-first developer to a support studio for like a AA or AAA game that's in development, or if they'll stick to working on mobile games, or perhaps even like companion apps like the Destiny 2 app for Starfield or something like that. Something along those lines. I wish them the best, though. I can't wait to see what they're doing because I'm really rooting for the home team here. I just don't think we'll see anything at E3. Next up, we have Arkane. Arkane is actually split into two studios, Arkane Austin and Arkane Lyon. I don't expect to see anything from Arkane Lyon as they are about to release Deathloop as a PlayStation exclusive, which will stay exclusive for at least a year. But there are way too many rumors surrounding the vampire simulation game, codenamed Omen, coming from Arkane Austin team that I think it's very possible that we see a reveal of that at this E3. According to Jez Corden at Windows Central, that game is far along in development as the last thing that Arkane Austin did was Prey in 2017. And Arkane has been pretty prolific in terms of its cadence in game releases. I hope that this Project Omen is fully shown off, at least in a cinematic trailer, not just a logo stinger. But even better, I hope to see some gameplay from there, as I think having the unique kind of movement and perspective that Prey or Dishonored offers in a vampire dark fantasy setting would be really, really cool to see, especially on next generation. It would be my dream, though, to see that one of the IP that Microsoft was interested in acquiring was actually the Legacy of Kain IP, and that Project Omen is a reboot to the Blood Omen franchise, one of my favorite series of games from the original Xbox. Next up, we have Bethesda Game Studios. I expect Starfield to be shown off and to more or less be the headliner for lack of a better term, for this E3. This is likely to be the first kind of big payoff from that $7.5 billion acquisition that Microsoft had with Bethesda. So I imagine we'll see a pretty decent chunk of this game and have a lot of our questions in terms of what the game is and what the game's going to be like. All of those should be answered within this conference. Like circling back to my whole explanation about budgeting for E3 and stuff like that, all we've seen so far for Starfield is a logo. So the budget for the showcases is fully maxed out. So hopefully they unload it all and we see a lot of stuff. I kind of expect it to be a 2022 release, although I'm not ready to rule out 2021. I think 2021 was the plan all along, but COVID being COVID really throws wrenches in those plans. I hope that Starfield is basically kind of like a Fallout or Elder Scrolls game in a sci-fi universe and not this No Man's Sky style space exploration game that people are kind of rumoring it to be. My dream scenario, though, would be for that to be true, but also for Starfield to have some sort of multiplayer component. Not necessarily create a Fallout 76 in space, but for it to be multiplayer-wise more like Dark Souls, where you're able to see evidence of other players' impact on the galaxy and maybe through some sort of lore-focused metric be able to invite one other player to your game. Not like a shared world or MMO, but just kind of have, like, the galaxy is obviously a huge place, and I expect the tech behind Starfield to be pretty solid and for it to be one of the biggest worlds or universes that Bethesda has ever created. And for that to be a solely single-player experience could make for a little bit of loneliness, if you know what I mean. So being able to see kind of like the equivalent of a Bloodborne bloodstain on the ground from something that another player has done, I think that would be very cool. Next up is id Software. I don't expect to see id Software at E3. I think the DLC cycle for Doom Eternal is over after the Ancient Gods Part 2 release not too long ago. And I think that they'll be hard at work on their next game, although I don't know for certain that next game will be another Doom game. I think they will fill a similar role as what Bethesda's doing at this E3 with Starfield, with the next E3 and E3 2022, where they reveal what they're working on. Because people look at Bethesda as like the prize acquisition in this whole deal, but id is right up there with them in terms of their potential impact after being acquired. So look out for them in 2022 at E3. I hope that they are able to break from Doom a little bit and focus on a proper Doom 2016ification of the Quake franchise. Unlikely to happen, but a dream scenario for me would be to bring the fledgling Quake Champions multiplayer game from PC to console and on Game Pass. I think that could breathe life into it because Quake is an extremely fun game to play. I think that it's not a wise decision to put any PvP shooter as a PC exclusive because PC gamers tend to gravitate towards the same games. I'm not trying to start a war here, but there are games on PC that are extremely popular, and even every time a new game comes out, it has to work extra hard to grab an audience, whereas on console, I feel like people are easier to convince to go and try something else, especially when it's free to play, especially when it's on Game Pass. Next up is Machine Games. Machine Games is a mystery to me. I expect them to be at the showcase 100%. I don't know what they will be showing though. It's announced that they are working on an Indiana Jones game, and it's very likely that the extremely well done Wolfenstein series reboot gets a third entry to complete the trilogy. The question is, after they wrapped Wolfenstein 2 in 2017, did they start on Indiana Jones right away? It's possible that that is the case, and just might had to wait for the announcement due to licensing arrangements and stuff like that after like there was some time involved where Lucasfilm Games was getting back up and running. So it's possible they were contracted to make that game a long time ago, but just couldn't announce it because of these different embargoes for these different things that the publisher was doing. On the other hand, they could have started work immediately on Wolfenstein 3 and that could have been in development for like a few years now, and that Indiana Jones was announced and is just starting its like pre-production or is just starting development. That could be why the Indiana Jones reveal really didn't give us any expectation on what to expect from that game. Either way, I expect them to show what they've been doing since Wolfenstein 2, and I expect that game, whatever it is, to have a 2022 release date. I hope, though, that they were able to jump right into Indiana Jones, as I think it benefits everyone involved when franchises as big as Wolfenstein that are already like at this point 2 games and 2 expansions in the books, to be able to change gears and work on something fresh. I think that helps the developers. I think that having that space between releases helps the fans. And then, you don't know, maybe they learn something cool while working on Indiana Jones that they can then introduce into Wolfenstein 3. So my dream is that they are able to do that, and that Indiana Jones fills the role in the industry left by Naughty Dog and Sony's unwillingness to bring Uncharted back. Uncharted's one of the best games ever. Nathan Drake's one of the best gaming characters ever, and they haven't released a new one since I think 2017 with The Lost Legacy. But yeah, long overdue. I want to see my Uncharted back. And if it has to be Indiana Jones doing the same things Nathan Drake does, I'll take that. Next up is Roundhouse. I don't see Roundhouse working on anything by themselves. I think they are a support studio, at least as far as I know. Could be completely wrong. So their work will likely show up somewhere, but it won't be clear as to where. They could be helping with Starfield, but I think at this point they are just a support studio. Next up, we have Tango Gameworks. Tango is the first ever Japanese developer owned by Microsoft, but sadly, I doubt they have any presence at all at this E3, as they are hard at work finishing up Ghostwire Tokyo, which has already been delayed. It was supposed to come out, I think, last year, and is a Sony exclusive, at least for 1 year from its release. So look forward to seeing that on Game Pass maybe next fall, but I don't think they show up at this E3. And lastly, we have Zenimax Online, the team responsible for Elder Scrolls Online. I don't expect anything from them, honestly, at this E3, as the next-gen upgrade and expansion for Elder Scrolls Online would have just released a mere few days before the conference. It is rumored that they are working on a new MMORPG, so in a dream scenario, I would hope that maybe that is ready to reveal, but I don't think so just yet. And that's it, folks. That is every single Xbox game studio, everything I think that will happen in terms of third-party and Game Pass releases at Microsoft's E3 conference. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I am generally speaking somewhat sort of accurate with these predictions historically. Definitely not perfect, but I think I'm over 50%. So hopefully that turns out to be true here, because even if I'm half right on the stuff I'm predicting, it still is lining up to be one of the best E3 conferences, E3 shows in a long time. You got to keep in mind that it's very likely that a lot of stuff across the board, across all publishers and all studios, a lot of stuff last year was held back because of the pandemic. And this is likely to be, or likely to feel like, almost an E3 and a half worth of content. I think it's going to be a great weekend. I look forward to watching it. I'm going to be live streaming my reaction to the Xbox showcase, and also we're doing a podcast to kind of recap my predictions, recap what actually happened, and see how right I was. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy what you hear, please feel free to like, subscribe, and follow me on socials. I would love to see a new review left in iTunes if you can. I will read them on the next episode of the podcast. Again, thank you so much. It's been over an hour. Remember to have fun out there, everybody, and I'll see you next time.